Ocke de Boer, welcome to the Mystical Positivist.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on, and I want to start with our typical first question, which is to ask you about your background, but in particular about any impressions that you had growing up as a kid that, in retrospect, you can point to as having something to do with this devotion to not just the Fourth Way, but the work that the Fourth Way is intended to connect us all to. Whether that was through religious or spiritual training, or through some experiences that had nothing to do with religious or spiritual training, all of the above, anything that comes up in response to this question, we would love to hear about.
Okay. Well, I think that two experiences were of major importance. That's the fact that the family situation was a very difficult one. My mother was very sick, and she died when I was 16. She had multiple sclerosis, and my father did not have personal time for us. We were the three of us, my brother, my sister, and me. So I think those two experiences that definitely to do with the fact that I got interested in the question on what are we doing here, and why is this for, and why is there suffering, why are things so hard, and not in a. I think that was very important for me. Then I went to. We were. Protestant family, so I had to go to church. I don't know how to say that in English, that you talk with other guys, and the minister is there, and how do you say that? That you get trained to become a member of the church.
Yeah.
So sort of, and I went there, and and there were other people too, and I was reading a novel then from a Belgian novelist. And it was about Joseph in the Bible. And in the novel, Joseph was portrayed as one of the most bad political assholes you can ever imagine. so I talked about that there, that I read that. And they were just completely confused that I talked about Joseph in that respect. So I went home on my bike, I think it was 14 or 15, and I thought, I'd never go there again. If religion is so stupid, I will never go there again. So I never went there again. But I never stopped being interested in questions, what are we doing here, or in philosophical questions. So, and I think those experiences were important in my youth, that I was quite alone because there was no time for me, and that there was death around at an age that, it's hard to deal with. So, and such a close person as your mother, and also sort of religious awareness, so to speak, that didn't meet my hunger, or so I didn't find an answer in the religion that I was brought up in.
Got it. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, I grew up in a family that you go to church twice every Sunday.
Twice?
Twice, yeah, we went twice.
Wow.
Stitched trousers and it was quite something, if I remember that.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
well, okay, thank you. So, so you described a context that produced certain impression food for you, and I'm wondering if what it was, because of course in your book Higher Being Bodies you display familiarity with, and I think you mentioned that you knew yoga.
Yes, that was later. Yeah.
That was later, of course. But was that, what was the next step in you exploring this religious impulse that didn't get satisfied in the Protestant church that you grew up in?
Schopenhauer.
Ah,
Really?
Yeah, I think really Schopenhauer, and more than Nietzsche, but Schopenhauer, he was very familiar with Eastern philosophies, and I read Schopenhauer, and I loved it. I loved his everything about it. I really liked it. So, and also, and maybe that's really strange, I found it very humorous. His book. And maybe that was a little bit strange. And then later, when I was in my early 20s, I was with some older friends. They were older than I was, and they were interested in. They had a book called "In Search of the Miraculous" from Ouspensky. So they gave me that book, and I read that book, and I thought it was like coming home for me. Many people have that experience with In Search of the Miraculous. And we had a sort of a group that talked about the ideas in Search of Miraculous. And then they stopped. They went to do something else. And I was completely surprised. I thought, how can you do something else if you have met this?
Yeah.
You see? So that was a big thing. That was in my early 20s. And then a little bit later, but not much later, I started to read Beelzebubs Tales in the night shift. I worked at a youth prison in those days.
Yeah.
And I had night shifts when I was alone, and there were 22 children sleeping who were in prison there, and I had a night shift. That was only for a couple of months, and then I should go working with them during the day again. It was sort of in between job, because they didn't want to get rid of me. They thought that I was very good at that job with the children. And then I started reading the tales. And I described it in my book that one of the first things that I got from the tales was the image that there was another being than us, than humans, with way more centers, way more brains, who was on the planet Mars, and he was watching us and studying us through his telescope, or his tescuano, as it says in the film. And I thought that was amazing. I thought that was well, for me that was the genius thought that could be possible, and yeah, that spoke to me as an image, and that he talked about us as a whole, as a whole organic film around the earth, animals, man. Well, and then I knew that I had to delve into those thoughts of Gurdjieff more and more and more. So I did it. I never stopped.
So how did that happen? I mean, it's in your exploration of fourth way literature, you must have discovered the idea that a group is necessary. How did that happen for you? What were the results?
That's an interesting question, because I went to I never went to, I only went once to a group, and that was for 3 months, and that was the Fellowship of Friends. And that was a disaster. I mean, but it was also interesting, because they had a prospectus of By the Way books. And By the Way books, there was an advertisement in By the Way books that there was the Movements Intensive in 1994 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I already was a yoga teacher then, but I was very interested in the movements, because I never knew the movements, or nobody. I never saw them. I never saw them. There was no internet in those days to find them on the net or whatever. So I thought, well, let's go there. So I never went to the Fellowship of Friends again, but I went to Santa Fe on my birthday in 1994. And it was the first time I went to the United States. And I went to Minneapolis, and then I took a plane to Albuquerque, and I stayed there for the night, and then took the bus to Santa Fe, and we did 10 days of movements. And that's very interesting for me, because I couldn't do them. They were, maybe you recognized it.
Yeah.
And there was a picture of Gurdjieff with his head like this, that he just does his head, he bows for you. And I was looking at it, and I thought that was really funny that he was standing there and had me completely in that place, So those 10 days were magic for me. So and I and I met people there that I'm still that I still see. So that was like maybe sort of an international web of people that were communicating. That started there a little bit.
But you said that you were already doing yoga at that point, so there's a connection with an Eastern thread as well, and I'm interested in how fully developed that was by the time you became more deeply involved in the Fourth Way work.
That was pretty developed because I went into a system from a Dutch philosopher called Saswitha, which is called unity thinking, which I talk about in my book.
Yes.
Right.
And that's disparity thinking. That's really a third way system.
So did you actually then work directly with Saswitha?
Oh yeah, I went to a yoga school for 4 years.
Okay.
And I mean, that was quite a yoga school. That was a Raya yoga school, and we really had to take exams. And I'm still very grateful to my yoga teacher, Hans Wesley. I thank him again now in this interview. And I thanked him before at the interview with Ian McNay, because he gave me a very solid background in esoteric systems. And he was very keen on the fact that you had to have a sort of general education into esotericism, like the Sutras of Patanjali, the Upanishads, old Raya yoga way, so yoga for the mind, ways of thinking,
Right.
and the Pali scriptures, and so a lot of esoteric Buddhism, but really also the yoga systems, the Vedas. With the Vedas, I'm closely connected to Schopenhauer too. Schopenhauer had a lot of his ideas are connected with the Vedas. So I did that for many years, but it was at some point it was too intellectual for me, and that's why I found out my sort of karmic relationship with the Gurdjieff work with the Fourth Way, because it's another way. It's not that intellectual.
Well, let me ask for clarification. When you speak of Raja Yoga, that implies a meditative system, a system of study. It doesn't necessarily imply what most people in the West associate with yoga, which is body positions. Was there a Hatha Yoga component to this teaching, or was it?
Yeah, both. All sorts of yoga were really there in that school. Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, the whole system, but also Hatha Yoga. He was a very good Hatha Yoga teacher.
So there was some. What I'm interested in is the comment you made that particular practice or that particular tradition felt more intellectual when there was actually a body component to it. How was?
But the philosophy that was taught there was very intellectual, was how to think. And especially how to think according to the law of three. So how to think. And that's very interesting. That's the third way. And there are 4 ways. The way of the fakir, the way of the monk, which is more emotional, and the way of the yogi is really an intellectual way. So it's how to think. And but the fourth way is different. They also call the fourth way You can find that on the web, and Gurdjieff talks about it, I think, in Notes book. So it's but I got stuck in the intellectuality because esotericism is not only about right thinking; it is about applying ideas on your being. So
I would say it's even anti-right thinking.
Yes.
Well,
yes. But it's about applying, an idea such as we have in the fourth way, such as self-remembering or self-observation. You can only know about those ideas if you try to apply them on your being, if you try to do them in a practical way. Or else you will not get initiated.
So I have a question about that, because in a Raja Yoga tradition, presumably there's practices, concentration practices, meditative practices that have an experiential dimension to them. And it seems like you couldn't go very far into that system without some level of direct experience with what the ideas are speaking about. So was the issue with the school and the community you were working with more one of emphasis, or was it simply that experiential dimension was not present for you?
It was not enough.
Okay.
And so I got back at the fourth way.
Okay, sorry.
But, it was. I stayed there for 4 years. I mean, I didn't stay there because there was nothing there. There was definitely something there. And then I went into the fourth way. I still have it in my diary. In 1990, no more things from here, only. And so I went into when my oldest daughter was born. It was 1990. We started our own group, and that still exists. So it is now 2014. So the group is 24 years old.
So what can you describe, maybe at a feeling level, what it was in the fourth way that was feeding this need in you?
The practicality. That you have to work. That you have to do something. That you have to make appointments with yourself during the day. That you have to find out for yourself what self-remembering might offer. That you have to do that until you feel your own nothingness. I think that's so important. That's in the sutras too, in the sutras of Patanjali. But Gurdjieff made things so practical.
So it sounds like you're saying that if there had been a context within which your introduction to, for example, Patanjali and other practices of yoga, if that had been in a context which incorporated your daily life, then your response to your yoga training might have been different, might have had more guts to it.
That's true, but the fourth way is a little bit more. Because he made many of the ideas that are in Eastern philosophies, Gurdjieff made completely practical. I mean, and he that's his gift to the world. So, and he knew so much, or he understood so much about those things, about that he was capable of putting them into a language and into a system, in between quotation marks, for us. And that's why we are now working within the work. So it's so much bigger, the work, because you can apply ideas on yourself, is so much bigger than a lot of yoga trainings. But it depends, of course, also on who gives the yoga training.
Yeah.
But the guy that I was with for 4 years, he was just a big preparation, or he was also a recognition of what I already knew. So he touched things in my subconscious that were ready to come out.
I see.
So I was very grateful with that school, and I was very grateful with the information I got there, because it put me in my place. I was a guy that worked in a youth prison. I worked with criminals on the street. I was not. I had two worlds. And when I came home, I was into the books, and I was listening to piano music from Chakra, for instance. So there were two energies. There were two energies at those days. And then I went traveling. I traveled a lot when I was younger because I was a sailor. And I went to Africa for 6 months, 7 months. And I met my wife there. And we got married. And then afterwards, I think my wife had also to do with that, because she grounded me very much. So, and we started a group in 1990. And the group went on, and I thought I had to get material. But it never popped into my mind to go to the foundation or something, or to go to other groups. It just didn't happen. And if I look back now, I'm now 24 years further, and now I think, why did I not do that? Why did that not happen? But it didn't happen. So I just collected material, and I'm a pretty good collector. So I went after the movements, and I went after papers that were not in the books. And then we organized quite a big event in 1996 with Madame Solange, who was a movements teacher from Gurdjieff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of people from all over the planet came to that particular gathering. And there were guys there that were from the farm.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine was there. It's called Michael Smith. I'm still pretty close with his wife. He died in 2001. And I got contact with the farm, and I got all sorts of material from him, the sittings that Mrs. Staveley had collected, and I could go there and do movements. I was welcome there. So I found something. So I think the farm was a major help indirectly to our group, because those people came over, helped us with movements, and helped us with material. Because I knew that a lot of material that was not in the books. And I also went to your area because I lived for a couple of months with my family in Sebastopol, with Russell and Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is a very, very good movements teacher. And and people from the farm came there, and so that's how we got our information as a group. And I went to the All and Everything conferences, so we meet people there too.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book at one point, Higher Being Bodies, that it's important to make efforts to actually find material.
Of course.
That having it just spoon-fed to you actually is less helpful than if you have the need and you have to exert some energy to find some of the material.
Yes. Just like musical albums when you were young. You wanted to hear the musical albums, you have to find them. The music. That's where we stopped talking last time. You ever heard of the band called King Crimson?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, well, that's just Robert Fripp. He bought my book.
Ah.
I'm very proud of that, because I listened to King Crimson when I was in my early days, and I thought that was very good music. There was something there, And so, that's the same with our work. You have to make efforts to find material, and you will also get help in that respect. So, because if there's really something true in you and you really want it, you will get help.
Absolutely.
And so I got the material, and I have a lot of material.
Well, so what I'm interested in I asked you the question about groups earlier, and it sounds like your solution to finding a group was to create your own group. And
that's really true, yeah. But I didn't do. That's really true what you say there. But I didn't do that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look back, people might think that I did that on purpose, but I didn't do that on purpose. It sort of happened.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
And your wife, it sounds like, was someone who is important for that, and whoever else was important for that. Has there been a large nucleus of people over this 24 years that you refer to?
No, well, we had a group going for a long time for about 14 people,
mm-hmm.
and 15 people, and then it collapsed, and I had more people even in the beginning. And I started to write a course, an
mm-hmm.
introduction course
mm-hmm.
of work ideas. It's a 30-week course.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a 10-week course, but then in the beginning it was 30 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people did those 30 weeks and then came into the group. And people come and go. But there's a core, and that has been there for a long time.
I see.
So, and it's still there. And so, there are people coming for a couple of years, or there are people staying a long time. People go away, and you know how it goes if you are affiliated with the group yourself.
Oh yeah.
So that's how it went. And I felt responsible for if it has to be a fourth way group, which I really wanted it to be, then I need material. So I went all over to get material. So it was a very important thing in my life.
And did you find that the existing fourth way groups were cooperative in that venture?
Yes, I got a lot from the farm. Well, not everybody. And you meet people at the All and Everything conference, where I was at the beginning of the All and Everything conference. The first one was in '96, and I was there in '97.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time I met Paul Beekman Taylor, who wrote on the back of my book.
Yep.
And he's a very interesting, very, very fine person. And he lived with Gurdjieff, of course, so he could give the feeling that I already had, what kind of a man that was. And he did things for me, especially when the book came out. And the ball started rolling, and it never stopped rolling. It's still rolling. So. Got it.
Well, let's talk more about the specifics of your book, Higher Being Bodies. I guess the first question is just a set of context of what was the inspiration for this particular book?
The death of my sister. My sister died at the age of 51. We are 2 years apart. And my sister was a writer too. And she wrote about the feminine influences on the early church, about Mary Magdalene. And she was sort of a colleague of Elaine Pagels, you probably know.
Yeah.
And my sister was a minister and a theologist. And she died of cancer. And that made a big impact on me. And that's how I got the feeling somewhere that I had to write down what I have experienced and what I think I know, because it made things more serious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there was the first death of my mother, which was a big transylvanian disturbation in my life, you know, as in the tales. And the second one, I think, was the death of my sister. So that was an earthquake in your life.
Yeah.
So and then I thought, this is really serious. I cannot fool around anymore. Not if I did not that I did that all the time, but I thought I have to affirm something that is not yet there, and so that's how the book came about.
And it's interesting that the book seems to be partly a collection of essays, and yet there's a thematic movement through the book. I'm interested, just as you step back from it, how do you see the arc of the book and how you elaborate the ideas?
I wrote the book from my subconscious. I wrote it every morning. I went out of bed and I ran to the computer and I wrote it. I'm not even good at writing. I use 2 fingers.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I sat in my underwear and wrote a chapter. And then and I didn't even know that it was not the intention to really. It was after a few chapters that I thought, hey, this will be a book.
Yeah,
I see.
Got it.
And then I started to sometimes I think things, and okay, this is important, and I got things from my yoga training, my Raya yoga training, from my general education on esotericism, and I sort of put it all together. And then I started finding people that might also be interested, so I sent it to people, and they could, people that I thought had enough intelligence to get it, and they could comment on it.
Was that helpful to you?
Oh yeah.
So you got some useful and relevant comments back when you circulated a manuscript or parts.
Yeah, some people, yeah.
Good.
And then I found someone who knew way more about English than I do, Susan Aronson. I'm not English, so I met her at an All and Everything conference, and she was interested in my book or my chapters, and she said, "Well, I'm a trained editor. Let me look at it." And so she looked at it, and then you go to several publishing companies, and they all turn you down. Because they think it's not good enough, or whatever they think doesn't matter.
Well, they think it won't sell enough.
Yeah, good has nothing to do with it.
Right. It's not about good or bad.
And that's how Susan got me in touch with Ben Elias and his mother Penelope, and they have a company called Beechhill, and so a sort of an editing group came, and we Skyped a lot, and they made a book out of it. I mean, that was not only me, because they, you know, I'm not English, so I talk about Big Bird, you know,
yes.
in my book, and Susan explained to me that was from Sesame Street. So, somehow it got, it was a mutual,
funny.
It was a mutual thing, you know.
Yeah.
Those were really, I really had a very intelligent editing group, and they were really interested in the material, but they also made it good English. So I think the book went well.
Yeah.
Well, even the illustration of the bird of the bird, it does evoke Castaneda and not Big Bird, so they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
So I'm one of the things I found interesting just in the opening of the book is that you start with drawing an analogy. You start your entrance into the fourth way ideas is partly through the lens of some of the Eastern ideas from the Raja Yoga tradition, and I'm interested in your perspective on that. In that you talk about the energetic system of the chakras and the 7 centers that are depicted in the yogic tradition, and draw analogies with the fourth way understanding of higher being bodies. And I'm wondering if you could speak about how that understanding both operates for you and, you know, how you describe that in the book.
Well, you know, in Nott's book, I don't know if I have it here, but I think it is on page 174 or page 176. Nott's book, Teachings of Gurdjieff.
Uh-huh.
Raja makes a comment that our true body is not our physical body, it is the body around us, which is called in Eastern philosophies, and even in anthroposophy, it's called the etheric body.
Right.
And you also have a Muslim variant of that, and that's it's almost the same, but not exactly the same. But it's that there are accumulators and centers around you that is more your body than the physical body. And that is material for another body. I mean, if you read Madame de Salzman's book, Reality of Being, which is an excellent book, she talks about that a lot. And it has a lot to do with what she received from Gurdjieff, and it has a lot to do with Eastern systems. And I don't know how they call it in the Muslim world. They have a different... there was a guy on the internet that gave me a 1-star review, and he talks about it, but that was not very interesting. But what he refers to is interesting, and I use the chakra system because those energies accumulators are around you, and they are they are sort of the sense organs of what Gurdjieff calls the Kesdjan body.
So is it the case that your understanding is that the Kesdjan body, or the body Kesdjan, is the equivalent to the etheric body?
No, it's the etheric body is in between the physical body and the astral body.
Okay.
The Kesdjan body.
So the Kesdjan is the astral body.
Yes. So the most fine material of our body, fine substances of our body around us that we cannot see, but that has to do with our brains, is the etheric body. But that's on the other side, the most material side of the Kesdjan body. The most matter, the most, I don't know how to say it in English.
Yeah, that's clear.
It is sort of the skin, or the sense organs of the Kesdjan body, yes. So it's important. And in the yoga systems, it's very important that we do not develop enough the etheric or the accumulators around us. There's a whole philosophy that about that. And that's very close to the sittings that are, for instance, in Madame de Salzman's book, where she talks about that she got from Gurdjieff. I got those sittings from a friend of mine, a priest in Australia, Joseph Assis, who's a student of Mr. 80. And it's amazing if you do those sittings and you have a little meditation training, then it is amazing what you find. And I had a lot of meditation training. And so it's amazing what you find because they're extremely powerful sittings and exercises. Gurdjieff calls them exercises. Doesn't matter what you call them, but they're very, very, very powerful. And I started to collect them and to do them. And I now I do them, and that was partly because of Mr. 80. I got those sittings. He spoke them in the 70s and 80s, and I did my thing.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, then the one function of the sittings is to facilitate a cultivation or a development of the etheric body.
Yes, to make it stronger.
Okay. And is it the case that the development of the etheric body is a precursor to a development of the body Kesdjan, or the astral body?
Yes.
So I guess a question that comes up, which is in a lot of esoteric literature, there's a presumption that these multiple bodies exist fully formed. And in the Gurdjieff work, it's pretty clear that all that exists is a template or you might say a seed for the expression of these bodies.
Yeah, that's why I talk about the lunar soul and the solar soul in my book.
So maybe,
the lunar soul
please.
the lunar soul does not emanate by itself. It only radiates. And it belongs to the Kesdjan body of the earth. The earth also has an astral body, which is in a stage of development. And we, organic life around the globe, animals, and we belong to the Kesdjan body of the earth. But we can grow out of it, so to speak, if we develop. That's the seed for a solar soul. So you have a lunar soul, which belongs to the Kesdjan body of the earth. You have a solar soul, which can grow into the universe, so to speak, which can go beyond beyond the Kesdjan body of the earth. The solar soul you make through your own effort. This is the soul that Gurdjieff talks about in the third series, where he has a beautiful poem. Mm-hmm. And there's also an original chapter of Purgatory that I have that is completely scribbled in by Orage. He talks about two kinds of souls, but it's actually an old esoteric idea. So that's true, and it's completely practical, and it has to do with the three kinds of food. With your normal food, your hamburgers, in your case or my case, and the food, the air, and impressions. And sittings, or the exercises that Gurdjieff gave, are very important in that respect. And also the movements are very important.
So let's, I want to clarify the idea of the lunar soul more. Is it the case that the lunar soul is, you might say, the ordinary etheric atmosphere that we have around us when one is not making original or self-willed efforts?
Yes.
It's the consequences of our friction with everyday life.
Yes.
The reactions that we have, the emotional states that we inherit, the more or less
our forces outside.
In a way, it's the energetic state of a human being that's plugged into the social context and the civilization around us and everything.
There you have it.
Okay.
It has to do with our cosmic function. We have a cosmic function, not only, but also as a whole of humanity around the globe. It's a cosmic function. And it's completely f***ed up when it is in the second state of consciousness. Look around you, you can see it. You know, with all the wars and things going on. Yes, this is what the Tales for me is very much about.
Well, this is one of the things about Gurdjieff that I think, it seems to me he's quite original in describing the operation and the potentials of ordinary functioning and extraordinary functioning. Can you talk more about the differences there?
Yeah, but I wouldn't call it only extraordinary, because extraordinary points to something that cannot be done, and I think that's not the case. I think if you truly try to work on yourself, if you try to self-remember, and if you try to work, then I think you code something of a higher nature.
Well, let me just interject then. I want you to continue, but I will say that distinguishes you from a lot of fourth way practitioners that I've met in the past. Right there, that statement you just made, and it's one of the reasons that we're talking to you today, precisely because of this view that you have. It's not necessarily widespread in the fourth way, it seems to me. Would you agree with that statement? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, without commenting further on that, continue on with what you were talking about before.
I mean, if it was as hopeless as some of the followers in the fourth way say,
yeah,
then
why bother?
I don't believe that.
Right.
Good. What?
Right. We're in agreement.
We're very much in agreement, but I wasn't it is implicit in your book, but you just stated it very clearly right there.
Yes.
Yeah, or to state it for our listeners.
Don't only you're right about Gurdjieff bringing something very extraordinary. But if you go to Egyptian mythology, and if you go to what they call the higher bodies as Ka, and the energizing energy called Ba, there's a lot of information there, which can be found in the tales, can even be found in dictionaries, such as the Dictionary of Scripture and Myth by A.O. Costel. That's, if you really study, you will get rid of a sort of a grim nature that we're all machines, which we are in our lower parts, and that everything is hopeless. And if you listen to those guys that are saying that, then you will make another Protestant church.
Indeed.
Yeah. But it's quite a shock, and that's what Gurdjieff was capable of.
Yes.
And not on a small level, but also on a bigger level, because it spreads all over, that we are living in automatic energies all of the time. And actually, what he was wishing for, that we should feel our nothingness, which is so important.
Yes.
So for listeners who may not be as familiar with this idea, can you describe a little bit more what it means to feel our own nothingness?
Well, the listeners that were not familiar, they already turned the radio down.
Probably long ago, yes, I agree.
Well.
But, yes, well, you are familiar with the term self-remembering,
yes,
or self-occupation. If you try tomorrow at 12, 3, and 5 to remember yourself, you will notice that you cannot do it. It's very difficult to do. You can try, and it will show you that you have to be humble in a sort of, also in an intellectual way. It shows you a certain humbleness. That we think that we are the architects of our own lives, but we're not. And this is really interesting, in fact, because we think that our egos think that. They think that we have free will. Let me tell you a story. I wrote it this morning because I'm going to tell it also at the All and Everything conference. A couple of months ago, I saw a documentary about a French school. There were children in that school, and they were introduced to philosophy. Small children. I mean, really small. So the teacher was introducing them to certain ideas. One of the ideas was that Einstein said, that's what the teacher said, that if the moon could think, then the moon maybe does not want to turn around the earth. He wants to do something else. You see? So that's where Einstein stops. But if you explore that thought a little further, if the moon would be able to think, then you could say that the moon would have a sort of a free will, right? So the moon would think that he turns around the earth out of its own free will. That's not the case. And we humans, we are in the same position. We all think that we are the architects of our own lives. We have free will. We can do anything that we want. We can make our own lives, the American dream or whatever. But that's not reality. We are machines driven by life. in that respect. And if you look, that well, it's almost dangerous information if you really think about it. But if you start to work on yourself according to Gurdjieff's ideas, which are not only his ideas, but he reintroduced them very strongly, you will find out for yourself, and I know that you have done so, or else you wouldn't do this interview with me, that, you know, that you are a non-entity.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
and that non-entityness is getting back to the Lunar Soul, is the...
yeah, well, the Lunar Soul, it's not that, it's more that it belongs to the Earth.
Right.
It's an animal state, like Gurdjieff calls Etheric in the Tales.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And it's that energetic matrix that returns to the Earth on the death of the organism.
Yeah, it returns to the Kesdjan body of Earth. Maybe that's okay, you know, and those people will somehow develop also later on. We don't know. We cannot say, like many people in the Gurdjieff work say, there's only a few people that will be saved. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous.
That sounds like Calvinism.
Yeah, that's why I talked about the church earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so then let's talk about the solar soul that is distinguished, and this is a potential that every human being has, but it's not necessarily fully actualized, or maybe it's partially actualized, but it's certainly not fully actualized in the ordinary human state.
That's why we are here.
Right. And as I understand what you're describing, then a certain quality of effort is necessary to begin to activate the solar soul.
Yes.
So can you describe what that quality of effort is?
The collected state is the beginning.
So what do you mean by the collected state?
The collected state is that what Gurdjieff gave as a morning exercise is that every morning you try for 10 minutes to collect your energies. And to stay collected instead of being dispersed. So if you enter into a room and there's a lot of people there, you lose yourself into role playing, into whatever is anticipated of you. If you stay collected, if you can sense your bodies, that's where the collected state begins. Then something real happens. And if you start to observe that, you will see that literally anything can take your attention.
Mm-hmm.
You know. You're easily assaulted, you harbor resentment, you know, you think you're intelligent, maybe you're not or whatever, but you react constantly to the outside world. And if you try to be more free from that and you try to collect your energies, then the collected state is described in many papers that Gurdjieff presented. It's in my book.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a certain chapter. So if people buy the book, they find it.
So in a way, what you're describing is something that is a concentration, and yet you're relating it to the solar body, which is meant to, in a sense, allow us to expand beyond what this mechanical state associated with the Earth and the lunar Moon Earth system. So comment on that, if you will.
Yeah, you must take it very simple. You must take it very, 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 very simple. It is hard to stay collected. It's hard to be free from other people in your head, right? We constantly are in communication with the outside world. But that means two forces. We are here, and there's another force, and that's the outside world. And constantly we react, whether it's people, whether it's what we think of things, whether it's which is in a form of internal considering. We have to make a third force. And for that third force, we have to work. And it starts with becoming free from the outside world, to become more centered in sensing your body, to develop more than a mental contact with your body. That's the simple thing. What we are talking about here in relation to solar soul, that will come from that. You have to first make a strong foundation. This is the difference between esotericism and philosophy. Philosophy is studying ideas. Esotericism is applying ideas on yourself. And you will only find about the collected state or about sensing the body, or if you really try to do it, if you apply it. And then you will have material to think about. This is how meetings came about. and we are familiar with that. This is the beauty of esotericism. It's not only the fourth way. I mean, there are many esoteric systems. Is that people try to apply ideas on themselves, like monks, Buddhistic monks in many monasteries do, and they have information that is thousands of years old. I mean, and it's available.
Well, that's one of the things I like about your book, Higher Being Bodies, is this description that you've just given us just now of esotericism as being about the practical use of ideas, the application of ideas, and that's I think that's not the way most people understand esoteric work. One of the statements you make in the book is that you started off, I think you mentioned in your early 20s, inclined to believe that people, to use the phrase from the American Declaration of Independence, that all men were created equal. And I basically was saying that you talked about your in your 20s being inclined to believe that all men are created equal, and then later came to see that in fact there are important differentiations between
the being of people.
Between the being of people, yes. So can you expand on what you mean by that?
Yeah, that has nothing to do with being a big guy in society and making a lot of money and becoming the president of a nation. Being is something entirely different. And this is also an idea, being, the idea of being, which you have to work for to understand. Because it is very difficult, very sophisticated thing to understand. This is why Madame de Salzmann's book is a very good book. The Reality of Being, it's called. It's a very good book. Mm-hmm. It's very direct, it's very to the point, and she makes a lot of commentaries on being. And Gurdjieff thought from his being, especially later in his life. So, and there's a difference in being of people. There's a lot of difference. And I mean, it has a lot to do with what we call in our word conscience. That you are in contact with your conscience. And you can only have a strong contact with your conscience if you practice the being Obligonian strivings in the Tales. He's very to the point there. It's very, so, and it is, our work is about being. It is not about, it is becoming I know that there's a lot of intellectual people very interested in our work. Man number 3. I pity them sometimes because they get stuck. You have to work for your being. Mm-hmm. And so, the first thing to work on your being is realizing that you are a non-entity. Feeling it.
So for those of our listeners who don't know what Obligonian strivings refers to, can you briefly describe, in other words, what that means?
Yeah, well, if people, that's how this interview, of course, developed. People should read the Tales. People should read there are many good books in our work. I mean, that will make you familiar with the teaching of that Gurdjieff brought. And, the Obligonian strivings are in the Tales. And the Tales is also a book you have to work for. I mean, you have to really become friends with the book before it starts speaking to you. But that's not only about the Tales. If you read the Sutras of Patanjali, or you read the Vedas, and you really want to know about it, then you have to delve deeply into it.
Right.
It's not a McDonald's. It's not an esoteric McDonald's.
Well, it wouldn't. No McDonald's could be esoteric, I suppose, in the sense that you're describing. But what I hear you saying is that it's important to recognize that the way to apply these ideas is, in fact, to understand that there's a context within which that takes place. And part of that context, for example, would be reading the book and, as you say, becoming friends with the book.
Yes. You have to read it again and again and again. And never forget, when Gurdjieff wrote it, the intellectuals at those days, they said that he was crazy. And now the same sort of people are rolling over each other's back to explain his words.
Yes.
I mean, he wrote a book. He really wrote a book. That's a book. I mean, the tales, they are.
Yes.
I mean, that's really quite something.
And it requires very different kind of reading than...
It requires a different state of consciousness. You are forced into a different state.
Yes.
If you read it. Many people that read it for the first time, they fall asleep.
Yes.
You know? Maybe you remember that from yourself, because it requires something from you.
Yeah.
You have to make an effort. The same as the movements of Gurdjieff Movements. That's not normal dancing. That's sacred dancing. It requires an effort. And if you're not willing to make the effort, you will not get what you will not get the material that is behind it there. It's logical. It's logical, I think.
So we've been talking about this notion of effort and making actions that are not mechanically required of us in our ordinary lives. And you've stated that this is the beginning point of the cultivation of the solar soul. Can you
high being bodies.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit about the alchemy of that process? What is it about an effort that I make, an effort to remain collected, for instance, that creates a kind of a transformation that adds energy to this other way of being?
Yeah. Well, if you make an effort, if you make an effort every day to really sense your body, you will get familiar with sensing your body finally. It's almost unexplainable to people who are not trying to do that. That will have chemical results in your system. I'm sure about that. So if you're trying to make more than a mental contact with your body, because you want to develop your energy or stay more collected, you come into another world. You know. Normally, and it's really difficult because it's really difficult material in that respect, we try to understand work ideas in the second state of consciousness. This is where they are conveyed to us. But work ideas are so big and so alive that if you really want to get the energy that the work idea has, you have to enter the third state of consciousness. But I cannot tell you how to get to I can give you ideas to go to the third state of consciousness. One of them is self-remembering and self-observation. But you have to do it yourself before we can really talk about it. So, and this is what applying is.
So you've drawn a distinction here that I'd like to have you clarify for our listeners, and that's the second state of consciousness versus the third state of consciousness. If you can describe briefly in words what each of those means, understanding that it may be difficult for someone who's doesn't have experience of the third state to get it, but let's at least set the framework.
Well, the first state of consciousness is your ordinary sleep that you do during the night. The second state of consciousness is the state of identification, which we are almost always in. You know, and we will get to know that if we try to become aware or explore the third state of consciousness. To enter the third state of consciousness, we have to find out for ourselves that the second state of consciousness is a state of identification. And we think that we are already in a third state. We think we have self-will, we think we are conscious of what we're doing, we think we have a lot of influence, but if we really start observing the second state of consciousness, we will see that we identify with everything. Literally anything can take us. And if we try to become more collected, to have more attention, to develop more than a mental contact with our body, we will start coming into a different state of consciousness during the day. And the way to do that is to observe yourself and to have appointments with yourself. Say at 12, you try for 5 minutes to sense your right arm. In the beginning you cannot do that. Or you try to have a conversation with somebody while sensing your right arm. It's very difficult to do that. Or you notice maybe that you're always very impatient in the line at the supermarket, try to go against that. Very simple. That will build a certain friction. We are completely in a state of consciousness that we think we possess things that we don't have.
So this friction that is created when we try to go against the grain of our automatic consciousness.
Yes.
What is the nature of that energy?
Again.
What is the nature of that energy?
The sentence before that.
Oh, the friction. The friction that is created when we go against the grain of a habit.
Yeah. Well, to go from the second state of consciousness to the third state, you have to go against your nature. And your nature is crystallized in you differently than in your neighbor. You walk in a certain way, you behave emotionally in a certain way, you behave intellectually in a certain way. You have to go against that. A couple of times a day. You cannot do it the whole day. And that's going against the second state of consciousness.
And so when you go against the second state of consciousness, a kind of energy is created.
Produced. A kind of energy is produced that will not be produced if you are completely identified. It's the same with the movements. If you do the movements, you have to be completely... I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movements.
A little bit.
A little bit. Well, I strongly advise you to go after them, because they are in your neighborhood. You will really find out what I'm talking about. Because the movements are so well made, and they are very old. They're very old legomanism. They are really a language that will speak to you. The movements are made in a way that you are forced to be in the present. And you're forced to work with other people. You're forced to go against your nature. And then an energy will free itself that you will not be in touch with if you are in your normal identification state.
Got it.
And so these efforts and these various ways of making these efforts liberates or creates a kind of energy. Is this energy then what, as it were, quotes or coats the higher being body?
It's higher food. Yes, that's true. It's food. And in our normal state of identification, we're also looking for that food. You know, but we do it through drugs, we do it through sex, we do it through many things that are completely belonging to that state. But there's something in us that wants to be fed. And we need to feed our spirits' bodies. And that's what the Indians said. Or else they will die, so to speak. They will get squished. So it's a certain spiritual food, but very practical. That's why Gurdjieff is such a great importance, because the movements that he brought are completely practical.
So in the alchemy of the fourth way, there's the description of the three being foods, which you described earlier. There's the ordinary hamburgers, as we said. There's the air we breathe. And then there's this thing called impressions. And impressions are the material that arises in our field of awareness. And if I'm understanding you, if we can meet our impressions and be present to them as opposed to unconsciously reacting to them, then that allows us to digest that food. Is that correct?
Well, I write in my book that the present moment has way more possibilities than we use. Everybody, also the listeners to your program, will have the experience that you walk through the street, that you walked through that street many times before, but you didn't pick up that store. You haven't seen that peculiar store. And that store has been there for years. You see? So we are sort of impression blind. If you observe that.
Well, we understand that because we have a bookstore in Sebastopol.
And people are constantly telling us, how long have you been here? I've walked by so many years.
Well, that's what I mean. It's impression, but you can observe it in your own life.
Yeah.
We don't take impressions consciously, but you have to apply an idea like self-remembering to get there, to know that. Because it's very simple, but you don't know it. because you're always in the second state of consciousness where that information is not needed at all.
Well, my teacher used to say that impression food has to go to the right place. And
yes.
So what you're talking about is creating an avenue for that to happen, it seems
yes.
to me.
Yes. And where go, what go, that's its business, Gurdjieff would say. And I think that's true.
And so when that impression food can actually be received, it's that energy that feeds the growth of the body Kesdjan. Is that?
Yes, it's food for the Kesdjan body. I definitely agree with that. Also, the exercises in the sittings are.
And so when the Kesdjan body begins to develop, obviously this is not an immediate process, but it's the work of a lifetime.
Yeah, maybe more.
Maybe more. What are some of the qualitative markers of the Kesdjan body beginning to express more fully?
You will get addicted to esotericism. you will want it. You will need it. Everybody will think, why are you doing this?
Hamburgers become less important.
Yeah. Yes. So you will come into between two chairs, as they say in our work.
Mm-hmm.
Happy he who has a chair, happy he who has no chair, woe is for those who are in between. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you, to get back to that subject of the general approach to esotericism and this view of human beings as being different in quality of being,
yes.
I think that I think that a lot of people interpret that, of course, as being an invalidation of who and what they are, as opposed to an invitation to actually increase or improve their level of being or experience of being. So could you comment on that a little bit?
What does the word invalidation mean?
Oh, okay. Invalidation. So if something is valid, it's true. If it's invalid, it's not true. And sometimes people take work ideas, it seems to me, as an invalidation, as making not true the lives they're leading. But it's not true, it seems to me, that pointing out that possibilities exist means that the mechanical sleep that we've been experiencing is invalid. It's just not as interesting as other possibilities.
Yeah. That's close to why I call my book a non-dualistic approach to the fourth way. Because we have a tendency to take these ideas very dualistically.
Yes.
And that's when then we get stuck. So, and that's why you have to apply ideas. Because if you it's sort of phases. You have to apply, and in the beginning you think, oh, I'm a machine. I know now I'm a machine. And secretly you're very happy that you met this work and that you have maybe the possibility of not being a machine. And then you'll find out how difficult that is, right? Because
right.
20 years later you are the same machine. See? Not much has changed in that respect. And a friend of mine who was also an author, he said to me, his name is Will Mace, I like him very much. He said, you don't have to buy a loaf of bread in the store consciously, And I think that there's something there, that's true.
Yeah.
So I think that when we work, we have to take a certain amount of time the day that we work. And then we work really, we work for quality. It's not only what I say, Gurdjieff says that many times. But for the rest, you cannot work all day. And if you work, then the next thing will happen. These ideas, which are alive, and they have their residence in the Kesdjan body of the earth, but very highly, they are sort of a magnet. And you are a needle. And every time you make an effort, which is the third thing, you have the needle go against the magnet. And the needle will become magnetized itself. and then something strange happens, and that's in the Bible. Then knowledge will fall upon you. Seek you first the kingdom of heaven, and everything else will fall upon you. That's how it works. So you can think you're asked black and blue in an academic way, but it will not say that true knowledge will fall upon you. You have to make an effort again and again and again. You have to make a choice. You have to pass the threshold. You have to make this work important for you. You have to serve it. So in the beginning you might say, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but there will come a point in your life that you have to make a choice.
Well, I think this is a very sophisticated understanding compared with, I think, the simplistic responses that a lot of Americans, for sure, have to their exposure to ideas from India or Buddhist ideas from East Asia or whatever. In other words, they create a red herring of, I'm going to, if I engage in this process, I'm going to be living on a cloud in a state of bliss, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, you're on the 34th floor without an elevator.
Right. As opposed to this much more sophisticated understanding of what work can produce. I think it's really nicely stated. And go ahead.
Work should be very practical, and then it will become more your own, and you will do it. But it must be practical. This is so important.
Well, I also think it strikes me, my experience is that when one applies work ideas in the ways that along the lines that you're describing, then in fact those ideas and the products that they produce,
their content, yes.
Their content starts to actually affect those ideas, those experiences.
Yes.
The content of our experiences when they're not applying the ideas deliberately.
You get a relationship with an idea, so that the idea can speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
This is look at the cave of Plato. I put it in my book. That's an image, an idea that must become alive for you. That you can work with such an idea for years. And that's with many ideas in our work, which are very high quality. You have to come to a certain point, to a certain stage in yourself, that it can speak to you. So you don't fix it. Take an idea like essence and personality. Don't fix it in your brains. This is it, and this is it not. It has to speak to you.
Right.
By you constantly pondering it, which is also an effort to make.
I think this is another aspect of esotericism that is so clear, that often the ideas, as stated, are, from an intellectual level, fairly simple. But
yes.
It's the returning to them in a different state of being that allows the idea to become alive. And
there you have it.
Something that's very simple actually becomes this incredibly rich source of food, because there are layers and layers and layers and layers of subtlety that and it's very much like the idea is alive. I've noticed this, and there are examples of this in some of the Hermetic traditions, where very simple forms and very simple practices of alignment of oneself with energy seems very simple, and yet it's not the idea that's really, the idea is actually not as throwaway. It's the actual experience, the doing of it, and the returning to that, and the returning, as you say, that actually creates the possibilities for being.
Yeah, it creates data.
Yeah, real.
First time I understood praying, and I was grown up, as I told you before, in the church, was with the movements. I did the movements in Santa Fe, and I suddenly understood with all my 3 senses what praying could mean or would mean. That was an experience. I mean, not a little experience. I was completely taken by it. And that brought me something very true, very refined, sacred. Sacred is the word.
That makes sense to me because I grew up with exposure to a different church, the Roman Catholic Church, and that's another whole set of experiences.
I understand. You're kidding.
And nevertheless, I remember very strongly as a kid not understanding. I couldn't believe that praying could be simply mumbling a set of words over and over and over again with nothing else going on. It just didn't make any sense to me.
Yes.
And it's actually really only in recent years that I've really come to appreciate how not just how deep prayer can be, but how I was really in tune with what you just said about prayer a moment ago, because it becomes this thing that's much bigger than you are, that you tune into,
yes.
And that is a gift to my being, that boy that I was, wondering what this could be about, when I knew that there was something. I knew that there was something there, but I wasn't getting proper instruction in how to tune into it.
Yes, and we have to that boy must stay alive, because that boy has to take esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
It has to that's the energy that you're looking for. I saw a scientist on the television, and the scientist was asked, if you would ever meet an alien, what would you ask him? And the scientist said, I would ask him if they had music. I thought that's really interesting.
Yes.
Because music can do the same thing. It can level us to a different level. It can put us in a different level. We all know that. And it speaks to something else in us. And we have to find something in ourselves which has a lot to do with essence, that the higher knowledge is speaking to. You know? And we are so put into our personalities, in our egos, in our youth, that we try to digest this material with our personalities, which is okay, but it doesn't have to stay there. It has to go to essence. And in that respect, the Tales, and especially the chapter form and sequence, is very to the point, because if we take in an idea, we do it with our reason of knowing, but it has to be transported to our reason of understanding. Yeah, which has a lot to do with third force. I remember in the beginning, many years ago, I thought third force, law of three, that I just couldn't understand. I tried to understand it in an intellectual way, but it's not intellectual. You have to see it. And if you work again and again and again, there will come a moment that you see it.
Well, I'm reminded of, is it the word disparity that you use in the book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm reminded of those passages where you talk about this phenomenon, and of course I was also reminded with my background of there's a wonderful quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald, the American writer, who said something like, and I don't think I have this exactly precise, he said something like, the mark of a great mind is to be able to hold two opposing thoughts simultaneously in your head. And
yes. Step into the difference, into the disparity.
That's right. And so it seems to me that much of what you're pointing to here is the creation of a context in which two opposing ideas coexist without any problem.
Yes.
And that then in itself creates a context for more energy to be applied in these interesting ways that you're pointing to.
Yeah, all life is one. We hear that, but it took me many years to feel it and to see it. Madame de Salzman also speaks about seeing in her book, And Don Juan speaks about it to Carlos Castaneda, which is for me also that was a big influence in my life.
Mm.
And it's, yes, it is true. All life is one. And you can take nothing from oneness, and you can also add nothing to it. You see? Because it's all one. And it took me many years, just like I understood the praying in the movements, to understand that on that level. That is true. And that's partly why I wrote the book.
Ah.
Because we can all sit back and say, oh, I'm such a machine, how terrible. And, used by cosmic energies. And, but there's possibility. That
Right.
also gives you possibility.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that I think distinguishes your book, and it's certainly the case that great work literature has this quality, but it's inherently hopeful.
Yes.
Or inspiring, perhaps.
Yeah. It's filled with possibility. It's not this bludgeon that we're hitting ourselves over the head.
Yes. Well, that's interesting you say, because I called the book Higher Being Bodies, a non-dualistic approach to the fourth way, and my editor, Susan Dent Harrison, said, with hope. So that was her idea, and that's really true. Because I like that. That's true.
Well, as we were saying earlier, one of the regrettable things about the way the fourth way ideas have been applied by some is to squelch hope, is to kill it, actually, and that's unfortunate. I'm wondering if you've spoken of your experience with the system of yoga, or systems of yoga, for example, and you also mentioned in this interview talking about Buddhist monks, applying knowledge ideas, what we would call work ideas that are literally thousands of years old.
Yes.
And you've also spoken of your interest in Carlos Castaneda's work.
Yes.
What other contexts would you point? I mean, people can find inspiration in many places, in any place, really.
Yeah, I think mythology is very important.
Talk more about that, please.
Because there was I think it's 20 years ago, and I forgot his name, but there's a journalist in your country who did interview a guy about mythology.
Bill Moyer interviewing Joseph Campbell.
That's a fantastic book.
Yes.
And thank you, because I couldn't get a Bill. You're right. Bill Moyer interviewing Joseph Campbell, and that's a fantastic book because he really makes mythology come alive.
Yeah.
And he makes storytelling come alive. There's also a dictionary called the Dictionary of Scripture and Myth by Gaskell, which is one of my favorite books because it is a dictionary, but you can find anything in it. And there's a lot of effort put in that book. I think it is here. I have it here. It's a dictionary of Scripture and Myth by G.A. Gaskell. And if you, for instance, you look for the word I, that you can see with, they bring you to the cave of Plato. There's a lot of words that they refer to. That's a very interesting book. For me, it's one of the interesting books that I have. Very much in it. It even says how the Upanishads, all souls go to the moon.
Really?
It's very interesting. That's thousands of years old.
Wow.
And Petra said, it's in my book. I put it in my book too. I refer a lot to that book in my book. It's a very interesting dictionary, and if you are really into this material, you will really have a big treasure if you have this.
That speaks to a capacity which I think you allude to in your book, and Gurdjieff speaks about, and that's the capacity to think allegorically.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could talk about that in relationship to work ideas and mythology in general.
Yeah, well, that's what I said before. These myths and these ideas, they have to talk to you. And not a little bit, but for many years. And in a fairy tale somehow. We have to become like little children in that respect. And it will talk to you.
And that's really a sense of learning to be present to the ideas and the presentation without immediately processing, right?
Yes. Well, I talked about that those children that were introduced to that idea. Does the moon think?
Mm-hmm.
How they react? We should react like that. They were completely. That's really interesting documentary. They were completely present. Hey, the moon. The idea that the moon could think. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's an idea that spoke to them.
Yeah.
And that has to do with essence. And we are forced into our egos and our personality at such an age, and then we are completely, demolished by education, that we take everything in a dualistic way, so that the world doesn't speak to us anymore. We die in that respect.
Yeah.
We die before we die.
That makes sense. There's a term that my teacher's teacher used, and he called it a centrum of gravity question. Centrum of gravity question, and that is a question that you ask yourself internally again and again and again and again, intended not to produce an answer, but to in fact destabilize the
answering machine.
the crystallized and right.
That's what I talk about.
The crystallized and rigid situation that is produced by the education that you speak of.
Yes.
It's also the idea of the centrum of gravity question is like holding an antenna, and
yes.
so that you can tune into a quality of energy. And in a way, that's how I understand what you're saying about allegory. That
yes.
If I can hold the myth, or if I can hold the work idea as an antenna, and I'm receiving vibrations, I'm not thinking, I'm not chopping it up, I'm actually standing whole to receive.
That's what I mean with the needle and the magnet.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier that I want to go back to because I think it's an important element here, and that's that the idea of being of service to the work, and that
what?
The idea of being of service to the work.
Yes.
I'd like you to speak more about that, because I think that's particularly in modern spiritual literature, a lot of the orientation is do this and you get something.
Yes.
There's not as much about having to give something, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
That's very important. Service. It's very important. It has to do with how you touch the world. In the second state of consciousness, you only think about how the world touches you. You wake up and it happens the whole day, whether with your wife, your children, or at work, or whatever. How you get grumpy, or somebody says you're wonderful, or whatever, and there you go. See? How, and when you are of service, you think, how do I touch the world? It's completely different.
It produces different effects.
Yeah, and it's also how do you touch an idea? You see, it's really important. That's a completely different attitude.
That's a very different. I liked your formulation there. How do I touch an idea? I think that's a question that most people would never have heard asked of them, but I think that they wouldn't know how to address it, and so we've been talking about that the whole time, really, during this conversation. But is there another formulation of that you could offer people? What does it mean to touch an idea?
Yes, that's very interesting. Yes.
So, can you restate that idea in a slightly different way? I mean, how else would you put that idea of touching an idea and what it means to touch an idea?
Let's stay in our language of the fourth way. Conscious labor. That's conscious labor.
Okay.
And to stay in front, you have to suffer for it. You see, you have to. That's what voluntary suffering would be. And that's so you have to. You have to. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you have to become an antenna, and you don't have to think, "What can I get?" That's not how it works. You see, I mean, all those esoteric energies, they're not crazy, you know. They're highly developed, and very, very, very alive. So they want people with a certain being.
So in that sense, it's about attuning yourself to these purposes that are much bigger than you are.
Yeah, and you have to stay open to them and humble.
So that's the part of esotericism, I think, that is a wonderful corrective to the idea that esotericism is about some magician conjuring up personal power. This is the antithesis. This is the exact antithesis of that.
Around. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
we are on it's something that we don't understand or we don't ponder, because it is a thought or an idea that touches you when you are reaching the third state of consciousness. We are on a planet, we're constantly arguing with ourselves and with other people, and we are going with an enormous speed through the universe. We don't ask ourselves why we are in a body, how come, what's the purpose?
Yeah.
That's all second state of consciousness. Do not ask that. To ask that will touch the third state of consciousness. How is it possible that I am in a body? We don't wonder that. There's something amazingly interesting there, but we take it for granted.
And that's
maybe when we were really small, we pondered it a little bit. We can't remember.
Or it's the encounter with death, like you described with your sister recently, that gave you this impetus to create the conversation that this book represents.
Yes, well, you know, that's I work in the funeral business. I work with death. We don't. There's something in us. We think we're not going to die, but I assure you that will happen.
You have personal, direct impression food to confirm this.
Yes. And that's really interesting, you know, because that also has to do with a lot with us secretly think that we are the architects of our lives, you know. Many things just happen. Illnesses, death, also fun things, of course. Many things, you know, I'd say it always like, I can maybe decide what I have for lunch, but that's also trickable, you know.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I'm interested in your experience as an undertaker. You must see the whole spectrum of human reactivity to death, and that must be an occasion for you to bring a different kind of presence for the people that you work with.
Yes, it's very important that we learn to remember ourselves when that's the case. When not only also when we are confronted with that.
I'm interested in your experience about that, in that it's been my observation when important people in my life have died, that there's a unique energetic state that I'm temporarily put into, where the possibility of actually calling into question the ordinary second stage consciousness becomes much, much, much more available. And
that's true.
I'm interested if you see that reflected in people who may not have ordinary encounters with esoteric ideas.
I don't know about that, but in the Tales, Gurdjieff writes about intense being experiences that code also the Kesdjan body, and I think that's really true. I think it is really tricky to think of us being a member, that we think we are members of the fourth way, that we are more safe than other people. There's a fantastic joke about that, but that's something we have to get humble in that respect. I mean, death is very big, but birth also, I've had 2 children. I was there when my wife was giving birth, but that's quite something. You see, and I think that's with many things in our lives that we take for granted. We take things so much for granted.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and certainly in American society, the avoidance of any recognition or confrontation with death is almost the matrix on which the whole civilization is built.
Yes.
And death, the shock of death, is a great liberation, because for a moment people are in a different place. That stress does seem to reduce the power of the mechanical mind for a period of time.
Yeah. Well, Sogyal Rinpoche wrote a beautiful book about the
Book of Living and Dying. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, he was from a completely different culture, and he wrote a book. I think that's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
Our own teacher's teacher was created a set of readings for the dead. I think inspired by some of the Tibetan Buddhist material, but reframed in a contemporary American context and language. And I think that it's certainly intended, I believe, to help use that whatever is liberated when one is in the presence of the death of someone important in one's life to...
Well, you have a poet in your country called David Gurdjieff. He's also very much in our work. And he wrote a poetry book called The Dividing River, which has a lot to do with death. And I think he wrote beautiful poems about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've had his books in our store.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, well, we're getting toward the end of our time. We're not quite there yet, so I'm interested to know what projects you might have on the horizon. Is this the only book you're going to write, or is this just the beginning of a new direction for you?
Do you have a second series coming up?
I don't know yet. I'm very much speaking in the sittings. I'm in the process of speaking in the sittings and sending them to people that can do them, because I think that's sort of lost in our work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're very, very important. So, as I told you before, I got those sittings from Israeli, and if you read Madame de Salzburg's book, and if you are able to put one and one together, then in that respect and in that area, I am able to put one and one together. So I'm very much into the sittings, and I actually want to give them orally to people.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
So that's something I might explore later. Oh, thank you.
I think he needs this.
That's my wife.
Now the interview can really begin.
Yeah. So I want to do that in the future, and there's also a whole new generation of people that are really interested in our work, which I would like to serve, and maybe another book will be there. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give a talk at the All in Everything conference in April. Have you ever been to an All in Everything conference?
I have not. My teacher went, but I have not.
The next conference will be in Holland. So in a place here, half an hour from here. So if you are, that would be fine. Then you also meet people that you that's very interesting. I found it very interesting because you meet people that you would not meet else.
Yeah.
And then one year they do the conference in America, and the other year they do the conference in Europe.
Right. Got it. So you're continuing your work with your group,
Yes, I'm intent to do that.
Right. And you are open to what the universe gives you to do by way of writing, as well as
Yes.
sharing the sittings beyond your group, it sounds like.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you. I found it very interesting too.
Good. Very enjoyable.
Yes.
And we're very grateful for your time, your energy, and I'm looking forward to actually meeting you in the flesh as opposed to just an image of the flesh that Skype has provided here.
That's a good idea.
Good.
And they really think if you have the possibility of doing movements in your neighborhood, because Russell Schreiber and his wife, they are excellent movements teachers.
Oh, Russell has done a one book reading for his new book.
Yes.
In our bookstore. It was a big success, and I see him at the market from time to time.
Yeah.
I see him about town.
He's a wonderful man, and they have a lot of good work to offer.
Indeed.
Excellent.